Okay. All right. I do believe we might be live. Cool deal. Hey, welcome to another Sunday morning live stream. Today is going to be a masterclass on Beatmaker 3, specifically focusing on sampling into Beatmaker 3 from external gear through an audio interface, and also assigning creative macros inside of Beatmaker 3. Let's see. Hey, Samuel. Hey, Tony. Can you guys hear me okay? There's no audio to start the stream with today. We're just starting from complete scratch today. So hopefully you can hear me. Hey, what's happening, Wall? I'm a little bit nervous today. I got kind of a big one here. Let's see here. We're starting with a blank slate today, a completely blank project inside of Beatmaker 3, and we're not worried today about like creating the best grooves possible. We're not necessarily worried today about getting involved in like super deep sound design, but what we are going to work on today is we're going to sample some really basic sounds out of my Eurorack, and we're going to sample those into Beatmaker 3, and then we're going to create some sort of a groove with those sounds, and we're going to do a lot of creative macro mapping and hopefully show you guys some stuff that you might not have seen before that Beatmaker 3 can do. So let's see here. I guess what we'll do is maybe just really quickly talk about the setup itself. I've got the iPad here, and that's routed into an audio interface over here on the left. I'm using the Novation Audio Hub 2x4 audio interface, but which audio interface you're using with your iPad shouldn't really make a difference here, as long as you've got, an audio input so you can sample some stuff into it. Next to that, we've got the Novation Launch Control XL. This is a MIDI controller that's plugged into the iPad via the Audio Hub 2x4. One of the things that I like so much about this audio interface, the Audio Hub 2x4, is that it has a USB hub built right into it, so we can plug our MIDI controllers directly into the audio interface. Most audio interfaces don't have that, which is really, the main thing that I love about this Novation one. Unfortunately, they have discontinued this one, but you can still find them on eBay sometimes. And again, the audio interface today is completely irrelevant. Any audio interface that you're using with your iPad should get the job done. And I also want to stress, as we're getting started, that the MIDI controller that you're using is irrelevant as well, because we can map any MIDI controllers to Beatmaker 3. Over here on the right, I've got a little Novation Launch Key Mini so that I can play some, notes inside of Beatmaker 3. And we've got this, assigned to the iPad through a USB that's going into the audio interface, the same as the Novation Launch Control XL. But I just want to stress that a lot today, that it doesn't matter what MIDI controller you're using, because we'll just, you can just map as needed. Hey, thanks very much, Crit. All right. Let's see here, guys. What we're going to do is we're going to get started with a really simple start today. We're going to go ahead and just sample, I think, to start a melodic pluck out of the Eurorack. And we're just going to arbitrarily maybe pick a pad to sample onto. I'm just going to pick pad 10 here because I'm going to leave these bottom pads open for drums. And I'm going to go ahead and go into the second page here to get into the sampling window. And what we're going to do now is we're going to click the record button to get the record screen up, and we're going to tell Beatmaker 3 that we have an audio interface attached by clicking where it says recording source and no input, and we're going to select the input at this time. We're going to choose hardware input, and here I can choose either the stereo input on the face of my audio interface, or I can choose just like the left channel so we can sample in mono. And that's actually what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be sampling in mono. And let's see here. Actually, let me go back to this screen real fast. The only other thing that I need to do to make it so that we can hear the audio that's coming into Beatmaker 3 to sample is to make sure that the monitor button is highlighted here on the bottom left of this tab. And now we should be able to hear the audio that's coming in to Beatmaker 3 from my rack. Let's see what's happening here. Cool. Getting a little sip of coffee. we're hearing a really, really simple square wave pluck sound right now. And if we look on the screen, we'll see here that we're getting a pretty decent level for recording that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and stop my sequencer here and let the audio come to a complete stop. Okay, now there's a couple of different ways that we can sample into Beatmaker 3. We can use a threshold feature to where when the audio passes a certain threshold amount, like a certain level, that it automatically starts the sample recording. And that's what this little bar here is for. On the right hand side, we'll see that it actually moves the threshold number when I move this bar. And this just means that, you know, if I set it to say negative 42 decibels, it means that as soon as Beatmaker 3 receives an audio signal that's louder than 42 decibels, it will immediately start recording. I don't actually like to use the threshold method of recording, so I'm just going to leave this up today, and we're going to talk about specifically why I don't like to record that way. But if you do, then by all means, you can do it that way. What we're going to do to get the recording started, because we're not, you know, relying on this threshold method here, is we're going to go ahead and just hit start. And now it's just, you know, literally waiting for a signal. It's waiting on that threshold, right? But if I go ahead and just press play on my Eurorack and then I wait just a moment, we're recording now. And I'm just going to wait until that pluck reaches its absolute, you know, all the volume is gone there. We're still recording, and I'm going to play that pluck one more time now. Okay, now we're recording that pluck, and I'm just going to let it ring out all the way. And when it's done, I'm going to hit recording again. I'm going to X this screen out, and now we can see the samples that we've recorded here. We're going to go ahead and move the start point and the end point in on that pluck there. We're going to go into the edit screen, and we're going to hit this button down here. And we're going to go through this process a few times today. So don't worry if you think you're missing something the first time through, because we're going to go through this quite a few times. I might need to turn the brightness up on the iPad screen a little bit here. See, is this helpful? It might be a little bit better. Now the level is a little bit lower than I'd like it to be, so right off the jump we're going to go ahead and hit process and normalize. I don't need it to be a full up all the way up to 0 dB, so let's maybe normalize this to, like, I don't know, around -4, so we get a little bit more of a level there. And let's go ahead and use this plus button here to start zooming in to the front of the sample. Now if I click the back button here, the little left button, it's going to zoom in all the way to the front of the sample, where I can start moving this start point of the sample and trim again. But there's still some space here, so we want to repeat that process. We're going to hit plus 2 more times and go back to the left so that I can get really zoomed in on the very front of the sample here. That looks pretty good there. We're going to get the start point right up to where the actual audio is leaving the center crossing here. And we're going to go trim. Cool, that looks pretty good. We're going to go ahead and zoom out. I think I wanted to trim it right about there. We're going to go trim. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab the air at the end of this sample where it's kind of just ringing out. I don't need that tiny, tiny volume to be just ringing out the whole time. So we're going to go process and fade out 2 times. And let's see what that does to the sound. Whoops. Not sure why my camera's being a little screwy. It looks like it's being a little odd on my monitor there. I hope it looks okay there. All right. Hey, Ed, thanks for tuning in. Hey, Lo. All right. Okay. So let's see here. If we what we want to do actually first, guys, is we want to go ahead and save this sample and give it a name. Currently, when you record stuff, it's just going to say like the Audio Hub 2x4, 1, and then a whole bunch of numbers and all that. And this is where you can get anomalies to where like samples might not load next time if you're not careful. So we've recorded a sound. Now we're going to go ahead and save it. We're going to use these 3 dots in the upper right here, and we're going to go Save Sample In. We're going to choose the main sample directory today to save all of our samples in. So I'm going to go main sample directory, and this is a Eurorack pluck, and it's a C note, so we're going to label that as well. Whoops. C, hold on. Eurorack plus C. Cool deal. And that's going to save it in our main sample directory. We need to do one more step before we just leave it alone, and that's we need to reload the sample onto that pad from that directory so that Beatmaker 3 knows exactly where to find that sample next time. That's really easy to do. We're just going to hit the little, 3 lines up here in the upper left to get to our options. And we're going to go to the samples folder. This is the main samples folder. And we're going to be, oops, that's sessions. We're going to go to samples instead. And this is where we're going to be saving all of our samples today, just in the main sample folder. If we wanted to get a little bit more detailed with it, we could click edit, we could highlight the samples, and we could move those to other folders if we wanted to, like, maybe make a one folder for the whole session. But we're just going to keep filling up our main samples folder today. So I believe we called that Eurorack plus C, and I'm just going to grab that from the main samples folder and now drag it back onto the pad. Right off the jump, we'll see that if I hit the keys button at the upper top, I can immediately start playing that sound melodically. And I can also do the same thing from, let's see here, from my MIDI controller here. Okay. So we've got a little bit of a melodic sound that we can work with here. And let's see, we don't need to have that in keys mode at this time. Let's go ahead. I'm a chronic oversaver, and I encourage you all to be chronic oversavers as well so that you don't lose any of your work. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do here is we're going to go ahead and just hit save, and we're going to go save as, and let's give this a name, shall we? Let's call this MASTERCLASS macros for today. Cool, right? Rows. And now at any time during this save, and at any time during the session, I can just click that save button up here in the upper right, and I'm going to be doing that all the time through the session. Okay. So we've got one sound recorded. Let's go ahead and start recording some more sounds into Beatmaker 3. I'd like to get some drum sounds out of the Eurorack. So let's pick pad number 1 and let's record a kick drum this time. If we open up the second page over here and we make sure that our pad is selected that we want, it says pad 1. Cool, we're good to go there. We can click on the record button. We can make sure that our recording source is still the way we want it, and it is. It says the Audio Hub 2x4 1. And again, we're recording in mono today. So we're not using inputs 1 and 2 for a stereo signal, but we're just using input 1 and recording mono signals today. Okay. Let's go ahead and set up so we can record a kick drum on out of the rack here. And what I'd like to do is I've got just a sequencer that's sending out a trigger signal on the downbeat. And that's how I'm triggering the sounds. We're not worrying about sound design today. In fact, I'm specifically trying to work with some of the most simple and basic building blocks of sound as possible, because it's not really about sound design today, and it's not really about building really big, robust, amazing grooves. It's about how we record sounds into Beatmaker 3, and then the creative stuff that we can do inside of Beatmaker 3 with the macros after we've got some stuff recorded. Cool deal. So it's probably going to get loud, and let's see. I'm going to hit the monitor button so we can hear what we're sending in here, which currently is nothing, and that's not good. Out. What am I doing wrong here? There we go. That's cool. Let's go ahead and record that, make sure the level's okay, and I'll show you that on Beatmaker 3 as well, what the level looks like here going into it. It's a pretty hot level. In fact, it might be a little bit too hot, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the level down on the Eurorack. Yeah, that's probably a little bit better. And what we'll do is we're just going to hit start, and it's waiting for that threshold that we talked about. So as soon as I hit, the start button, it's going to go over this threshold, and it's going to start recording, right? But we're not really worried about that, because I'll explain why in just a moment. But yeah, what I want is that second kick there. Cool, so we're going to hit recording. And close this out, and then we can see what we've recorded here. Now, the reason that I don't really care for that threshold method of recording is that every now and again it can maybe cut off like the tiniest little millisecond fraction of the beginning of your sound. And I'm really anal about my sounds, you guys, and I don't ever want that to happen, to be anything cut off that I don't want to be cut off. So I always, personally, I take the time and I get in here and I edit every single sample by hand. You don't necessarily need to do it as, detailed as this, but that's how I do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep trimming this out. Let's get a little bit more volume on this. In fact, maybe we'll go ahead and just normalize this to like, I don't know, negative 1.7. Get a bunch more volume on this one. Cool. Maybe we'll trim one more time at the end here. Now I'm going to go in the end where there's just a little bit of air as the sample's kind of trailing out. And we're going to go process and fade out. I'm going to go ahead and trim that air off the front of the sample now. We're going to go plus a couple times and then, press the button here to get back to the beginning of the sample. We're going to go ahead and move the start point in a bit and trim. Let's do that again. Plus, and go to the left. So you can see there's a little bit of air there still that I kind of don't want to be at the beginning of the sound. We just want to sort of, and when it does that, I'm glad it's doing that. If it does that, if it starts like snapping where you don't want it to snap, you can use this little highlighted button here on the bottom left that says 0 snap or grid snap or snap off. And if you have snap off, we can literally just, stop the start and stop end points or whatever exactly where we want them. I think that looks, maybe I'll get in just that tiny little bit more, right? And we'll go trim. Now we're going to zoom out a bit so that I can grab the end point of the sample. I'm going to drag that all the way to the beginning and we're going to zoom back in. I'll show you why. I'm going to go all the way in. We're going to zoom here. Okay, now we're zoomed in all the way. I can't zoom in anymore. We're as zoomed in as we can be. And I'm going to grab that tiny little bit at the very beginning of this kick sample, and I'm going to do a fade in. Just very subtle here. We're going to bring that endpoint back all the way and zoom out. Cool. Now we have a really clean and well sampled kick drum sample. I'm going to check in with the chat real quick because it's difficult to talk super fast and do all this editing and I still have one eye on the chat. So let me take a look real quick. Yeah, I would love it if they could do some sort of shortcuts low. That would be fantastic. Absolutely. Again, though, what we can do is we can grab samples and we can move those to like a specific folder and store everything inside that one folder if we wanted to, and then drag and drop the samples from that folder instead of our main samples, instead of just continually filling up that one folder, if you know what I mean. Search work. I need to get into that, Samuel. The search works too. That's a good tip. Yeah, sound design is an absolute black hole. Hey, what's happening, Vortex? Thanks for tuning in. All right. Yeah, so basically today we're just going to sample a bunch of stuff, and the real meat of this stream is going to come in a few minutes, guys. Once we've got some things sampled and we start really getting creative with the macros and some routing with that. Let's go ahead and save this kick drum the same way that we saved our melodic pluck. We're going to save the sample now that we've got it edited. We're going to save it into our main sample directory, and this is a LPG kick 01. Cool deal. And now we just need to drag that back onto the pad from the folder that we sampled it into, which is our main samples folder here. Let me get our pads up first. And this is an LPG kick. So here we go, LPG kick. Fantastic. So now we've got a kick and a little bit of a pluck sound there. I think I'd like to get a variation of this kick drum though. So let's go ahead and tap the second pad. Go back into the sampling window on the second tab down. Click the recording button here to get our audio recording page open. We're still set to the right, input, and we're ready to go there. I just want to make an adjustment on this kick drum here and sample another version of it in. We're going to make sure we get monitor selected so we can hear what's coming in. Cool. Yeah, I just want a more mellow version of it, and I think that'll do just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start. It's now, again, waiting for it to, pass that threshold, but we're not really worried about that. I'm going to let it record the kick drum 2 times. Cool deal. Let the audio sit for a minute and get all the way, trailed out. We're going to hit recording to stop that recording and X this out. Now we can see, those samples. It's the same thing we did before. We're going to go ahead and, select a little bit around that kick. Go to the edit page. Down here we've got trim, right? So we're just going to go ahead and start trimming this out. Trim, okay. Process, let's go normalize. Make that about, I don't know, there. Good deal. Maybe get in a little more on the end. Cool. Maybe we can get some more off of the end and start zooming into the beginning now. We're going to go plus, plus, and then push to the left. Cool. We can really see a lot of this air here with this view. We're going to zoom on in and trim that. We're going to plus, plus again. Now we're zoomed in all the way. We can't zoom in anymore. I don't think I need to trim any more off the front of this, but I do want to do that thing we did before where we move the endpoint. We zoom back in. Whoops. And we highlight just this very, very tiny first section, and we go fade in. No worries. Cool. Whoops. Now I'm just going to bring that end point of the sample back to the end of the sample, right? Now I don't think we did a fade out on the air at the end of the sample, so we're going to do that as well. You don't always need to do this, but this is something that I get into with that fade out at the end, just to make sure that there's absolutely no possible way that you're ever going to get any clicks or pops at the end of the sample. Okay, we got a variation of that kick drum there. Let's go ahead and save that into our main samples folder now. So we click the three dots at the top and we select the main sample directory. This is the LPG kick 02. Cool deal. And now that's in our main sample directory. So if I want to grab that sample and bring it back into the session, we can go ahead and, get our pads view up. Go into the button at the upper left to get into our menu here. And we're already in our main samples folder, LPG Kick 02. Grab that and drag it onto the pad. Do you guys hear that we have a variation of this kick drum now? How like this one is a lot bigger and this one is a little bit more tamed. Let's go ahead and make sure that these kick drums can't play over each other now, because if we get two of these low frequency kick drums playing at the same time, that could create a little bit of low end mud in the mix, and we certainly don't want that. So if we assign these kick drums to what they call a choke group, that means that anytime one kick drum is playing and we trigger another kick drum, it will stop that first kick drum from playing. So we'll go ahead and just select the first kick drum here. How's my volume coming through? Is that a little low? I'm going to go ahead and, I think, turn this up just a touch. Let me know how the volume is on these sounds as we start building this groove up, guys. Okay, here. So we're going to assign kick number 1 to choke group number 1, and kick drum number 2 to choke group number 1. So now they cut each other off, and we don't need to worry about them accidentally playing over each other. We're going to go ahead and save at this time, and I think we'll go ahead and sample another sound in. Let's go ahead and sample some snare drums in, shall we? We're going to sample onto the third pad here, so I'll select that pad, hit the second tab here so we can get into our sampling view. We're going to go into the record mode again, and we're already set to record, from the same location. We're going to turn the monitor on so that we can hear what we're doing. And I'm going to go ahead and find a snare drum for us to grab here. We're going to trigger, I think, maybe I'll need a longer cable. Modulation 1, okay, into the snare trigger. We're going to trigger a snare drum. This is a 2 HP snare module here, and it allows us to shape a couple of different sounding snare drums. Let's see, it's probably going to get loud, and here we go. We'll get a little bit more volume on that snare. That's better. All right, and let me show you what that looks like here on the screen so you can see what the level is coming up to. I don't know, just a little bit above -6. So that's a pretty hot level, I would say. We're going to go ahead and hit start, and it's now started the recording because it received a threshold. What we want is that second snare hit that's super clean so we can get in there and trim it out ourselves. I'm going to go ahead and hit recording so it'll stop. We'll X this out. Now we can see those samples, right? So I'm going to just start zooming in on those. We're going to go to the edit page, and I'm going to hit trim, right? Now what we're going to do is let's see how long this sample actually needs to be, shall we? Not very long at all, really. So let's start trimming this out because there's not a lot of reverb or anything at the end of it. So it's a pretty short sample. Let's go ahead and go process and normalize to get that real loud. All right, nice big snare sound. Trim. We're getting there. Let's go ahead and take this air at the end of it here, and let's go process and fade out. Let's go ahead and get to the very beginning of the sample. Let's go plus, 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 and zoom in. Awesome. We're going to drag this over now. We're going to trim. Cool deal. That looks pretty good. Awesome. We're going to go ahead and save this like we did with everything else into our main sample directory. And we're going to go main sample directory and just give this a name. This is going to be, for today, we'll call this Eurorack Snare 1. Cool. And now we can X this out. We can make sure that our pads are back on the screen so we can drag and drop the sample. And we go back into our main samples folder now to find that sample. Eurorack Snare 1. Cool. Let's drag it onto the pad. Cool, so we've got a little bit of a drum kit that we're starting to build here. Let me see if I can check into the chat and make sure that everything, volume is good to go. Hey, thanks, Vortex. I really appreciate that. Samuel says, BM3 is still without any serious competition on iOS when it comes to sampling. I can't stress that enough. I really agree with that. The fact that we have this robust sampler here where we can, do all of this processing and trimming and zooming in on the samples, this is really an amazing way to work. And sometimes when I'm working with audio and samples on the iPad, I'll use this as just an audio editor when I'm not even using the app itself, because this is a really great way to see your samples really well and get in and get things trimmed and zoomed out so you can avoid those clicks and pops. Absolutely fantastic. Let's see if we can get a variation on that snare. We've got 2 kicks. We've got a little variation on one of those. Let's do the same thing with the snare. So I'm going to highlight pad 4 here. We're going to go into the record mode and make sure we hit monitor. Cool. And now all I have to do is maybe tweak the module a little bit and just alter the sound a little so that we can maybe get a variation on this sound. Maybe, ooh, that's kind of cool too. Yeah, let's get that little percussion sampled in. All right, we're gonna go, whoops, there we go, cool. So we're getting a pretty good level on that. We're gonna hit start. Now it's recording, but we're gonna wait for that second one. All right, good deal. Now we just X this out and we can see those samples. Go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Go to the edit page and trim that out, right? Start zooming in here. Trim that out. Plus, plus, and go to the left. I did too much, so that's cool. That's if you do too much. I love the undo feature of Beatmaker 3. We've chopped off more than I want, so I'm just going to go undo now and see what did it do. It undid the recording is what it did. Not a problem because no, it's still there. Hold on. Cool, it's still there. Let's trim that again. So we're going to go trim, plus, plus, and go to the left. There we go. Trim. And I think we're going to normalize this to maybe like, I don't know, -1-ish. Cool. Nice little percussion sound there. We're going to take off some of the unnecessary air at the end. Cool. Trim. Then we're just going to kind of highlight that air at the end and do that fade out. Awesome. Bet that sounds perfect. Nice. Now we've got a little percussion sound. So we're going to save this in the main sample directory again. I'm going to call this Eurorack Percussion 01. Cool. Now what we can do is go ahead and make sure that we're on the pads view, right? Go back to our main samples folder and Eurorack Percussion. Let's go ahead and grab that, but I don't want to put it next to the snare. I'm going to put it over here instead. Awesome. And what let's do is resample another sound onto that pad where I actually want to get a second snare. So we're going to make sure that monitor is on, and I'm just going to do a variation of that sound again. Cool. A lot of variations we can get out of the sound, so I'm trying to get There we go. Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, and let me show you what the level looks like inside of Beatmaker 3 as we're sampling that. Cool. So pretty hot level there. All right, we'll go ahead and hit start. We got it started. Now we've got that second one. Wait till it finishes recording there. All right, we'll go ahead and start trimming that out now. I'm layering sounds. That's cool. We'll go ahead and fix that. Okay, so we're going to X this out. And on this pad here, we've got a layered sample happening. So if I, okay, cool. So here on the left, there's two different little bottom sections. One for the channel settings and one for the actual samples that are on the pad here. And now if we look really close, it's showing that there's a Eurorack percussion on layer 1 and that there's that new sample on layer 2. Let's go ahead and select layer 1, click those 3 dots and go delete. And we'll just get rid of that percussion sample, which is up there now. So we're just working with the snare sample. Cool. Let's go ahead and zoom into the beginning of the sound. Whoops, maybe a little less that time. Trim, and let's normalize this all the way up and zoom into the beginning of the sound. Sort of trim that, maybe right up, take the 0 snap off, get right about there. I like the way that looks. I'm going to grab this endpoint, bring it right to the beginning of the sample, zoom right on in there to the very, very beginning. There, we're zoomed in all the way. And I'm just going to grab that tiny little bit at the very beginning and do a fade in. Cool, we'll bring the endpoint back to the end. Just make sure we grab this air at the end as well and do a fade out. Bring our start point back. Cool, now we're going to save this into our main sample directory again. Save into the main sample directory. And this is Eurorack snare, whoops, 02. All right, now we'll go ahead and load this back onto the pads by making sure the pads are in the view. Going to our window here in the upper left, it's going to put us back into the samples folder. And here we have Eurorack snare 2. I spelled that wrong, but that's fine. Cool deal. All right. Hey, thanks very much, Lo. I appreciate that. See if I'm missing anything. Hey, Michael, thanks for tuning in. If you guys have questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer those. It's a little difficult to keep up with the chat today, but I am going to attempt to do that so that I can answer any questions that come in as well. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and we've got kick drums. We've got some snare drums. Let's go ahead and put a hi-hat in here. We're going to go ahead and select, I don't know. Actually, let's put it above the snares. So maybe I'll pick this pad here. Which pads we sample onto is, you know, completely up to you. It doesn't really make much of a difference. Just, you know, how we're laying out the sounds. And we're going to go to the second page. We're going to hit record. We're going to make sure our monitor is on. I wish this would stay on, like once you've, you know, opened a pad and set it. But every time we go into a new pad to record on, we need to, you know, turn the monitor on. So don't forget, like if you're seeing some level coming in, but you're not hearing anything, just make sure that that monitor is turned on. Let's see here. Cool. We're going to go ahead and try to get, what did I say, a hi-hat now? All right. So what let's do is swap this over to my hi-hat instead and swap this out from here, right? Now I should be getting, cool. We'll just take that one right off the jump. And if I show you what it looks like inside of Beatmaker 3, we're getting plenty loud enough level there. I actually might turn the volume up the tiniest little bit on my Eurorack. It's good to get, you know, a nice hot signal going in. You certainly don't want to record a really low looking sample and then just normalize it. You want to get as much of the level in, you know, as you can in the beginning. I'm not really taking as much time as I would normally take to kind of sort that out, but that's just for the purposes of the live stream. So let's go ahead and record that. I'll hit start. Now it's go ahead and recording. We've got that second one. Just give it a second and hit recording to stop it. X that out and start trimming out that hi-hat. We're going to go ahead and go to the edit page and trim. Go ahead and normalize this. And zoom in on the beginning. I think we're going to go with right about there. Yeah, it looks good. Grab that air at the end and go process and fade out. All right, now we're going to save this sample like all the others. So we'll put it in the main sample directory. We're going to call this Eurorack hat 01. Cool. Okay. Now we'll just make sure that the pads are up. And we're going to go back into our main samples folder, Eurorack hat 01. Grab that. Pop that onto the pad. Let's grab another variation of that hi-hat real fast by tapping the pad we want to record onto, going to record, making sure the monitor is set. And let's see here. Let's get some sort of a variation here. Come on, you. Where are you at? No, that's not it. Oop. Almost. I'm not getting what I want, really. There we go. There's 3 different controls here, so I'm not sure which one I was needing to get to. That's the one. Let's make it even shorter. All right, cool. That's a little bit of a tighter, more closed version of the hat. We're going to hit start and let it start recording. Now it's started. We'll get that second one. We'll give it a second. Cool. Let's go ahead and zoom in here to the beginning a couple of times. I'm going to leave a little bit more of the air at the beginning of this sample than I did with the first one. Let's go process, normalize. Cool. Zoom out more. There we go. Whoops. And just grab this air at the end and do a process and a fade out. And we'll go ahead and whoops. Put that endpoint back where it goes and save this. We're going to go main sample directory, and this is Eurorack hat 02. Whoops. Okay, fantastic. Now we're just going to make sure that our pads are open. We're going to go back into our main samples folder and grab Eurorack hat 2. Cool. Now we have a bit of a variation happening on those hi-hats. And what I want to do is also get an open hi-hat, I think. So we're going to sample that onto this pad here. And let's see here. We're going to go back into the recording page on the new pad. Make sure that monitor is selected. And just get an open hat this time. All right. Whoops, I don't want that. Oh, what am I doing wrong here? That's not bad. Yeah, it's kind of ringy though. Maybe we'll get it tighter still. Ooh, that's better. Yeah, you recognize that clang, right, Wall? All right, let's call that it. And let's take a look at the screen here. Hit start. Now we're recording. We got that second one in, and we'll just give it a second to let the air come out there at the end. Hit recording again, and there we have our kind of open hat. We're going to go ahead and do what we always do and get in here and start trimming this out. Whoops. Probably can get a bit closer there, trim, and let's start zooming in on the beginning of this sample. Cool. Trim, plus, plus, and to the left. All right. Maybe right about there. Oh, that's nice. All right. Now, I'm not going to normalize this because an open hi-hat is quite a bit louder than a closed hi-hat by default, and I think it's loud enough as it is. I'm just going to do a fade out, and we're going to save this now. We're going to go main sample directory and call this Eurorack open hat 01. All right. Now we've got a little bit of sounds to work with, and let's see here. We're going to put that sample where we want it real fast. Open hat. Cool. Now remember how we took the kick drums and we made them so they wouldn't ever be able to play over each other at the exact same time? We're going to do the same thing with these hats and with these snares as well. So we're going to go into the, whoops, we're going to close that. We're going to go into the second page here, second tab, and on our hi-hats, we assigned the kick drum, rather, to choke group number 1. We're going to assign these hi-hats all to choke group number 2. And again, that just means that whenever one hi-hat is playing, that the other ones can't be playing also. And that whenever we, have an open hat, we can actually close that by hitting any of the other hats. Hear how that closes the sample? Okay, fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and hit save at this time. We also want to do the same thing with the snare drums. We want to make sure that those snare drums don't play at the exact same time as each other. So we'll select the first one. We're going to assign that to choke group number 3. We're going to take the second one, and we're going to assign that to choke group number 3. And now we have those taken care of as well, so that the kick drum doesn't play twice at once, the snare drums don't hit, at the same time together, and the hi-hats don't sort of clack at the same time together. Hey, what's happening, Jamie? Hey, Peter. All right. All right, let's see here. So, yeah, I totally agree with what you were saying there, Sample, about that lack of cleanup after the sampling. Totally agreed, yeah. That would be amazing if it just didn't save those leftovers, if you know what I mean. Okay, so I want to express a couple of things. One is that I want to remind you that anything that we sample, we can play melodically. So remember that first pluck sound that we sampled, if I click the keys button up here at the top, now we're playing that sound melodically, and that's the same for any of the other sounds as well. So if I select this snare drum and I hit keys mode, we can go higher, we can go lower, right? So I want you to keep in mind that any of these sounds we can play melodically as well. Even though we sampled that snare right there, we don't need to play it back right there. And when we're programming beats and grooves, we can use the keys mode to sort of put other pitches on our ghost notes and do neat stuff. Here that's, different than just going, right? So you can utilize the different pitches by just going into, let's say we're, going to put a hi-hat in. Instead of just tapping that hi-hat, I could go into keys mode. There's our original hat, but now I've got, the other hats. I could even put this, let's see, an octave down, rather. Yeah, and then here's our main hat on C3. But now I can go up or down in pitch from that. And do creative stuff that way as well. Let's go ahead and save at this time, and let's start building some sort of a really basic groove, shall we? First thing we're gonna do when I start working with actually putting stuff together is we want to make sure that we put a limiter on the master bus, and that's going to protect our ears, our headphones, and our speakers. So we're going to go ahead and click on main out here. We're going to go to audio effects. I actually have a detailed video on this concept on its own. We're just putting a master limiter on the master bus if you want to get a little bit more into the information of why we're doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and put that limiter there on the master bus. Bring the saturation up to 0.10. Really doesn't make a difference, but it's the tiniest little difference, Okay, and what that limiter does is, in case you don't know, it just keeps our audio levels from going over the 0 decibel limit. So if we're getting a sound maybe that's unexpectedly loud, it's not going to damage our ears, our headphones, or our speakers. Okay, fantastic. Let's save at this time. And let's see here. Let's maybe make a bit more up-tempo groove than 90. And let's maybe start out at 110 BPM and see what that sort of sounds like. 3, 4. Cool, I like that. Let's go ahead and record that in. Let's go 1, 2, 3, and cool. So we've got a little bit of a rhythm there. Now, if I go into the third tab over here, it's going to put us into our song mode. You can see it doesn't look like it actually recorded anything there. Let's see why not. What am I doing wrong here? Bank A1. Forgive me for one moment whilst I fiddle around here, trying to get where I'm trying to get to. That's really odd. I'm missing something here. I think I need to be on bank 1 there. There we go. Okay, fantastic. And there's my pattern. Every now and again, those little tiny things trip me up, and that was certainly one of them. We're going to grab this pattern, and we're going to drag it onto the timeline in the song view. That's the third tab down. And I believe we can get that to play and loop now. Take the click off. All right. How's that level at home? Is that loud enough? Can you guys hear that kick drum okay? Because I can turn it up a little bit if you can't. Let me know as we start building today. If things get loud, if things start distorting when my voice is going and the music is going, just let me know. Yeah, 64 pad mode is awesome for melodic playback as well. Let me show you that, guys. That's a great point, Samuel. So currently, we're looking at a 16 pad view where, there's 16 pads in our view. But down here at the bottom, we can change this at any time from a 16 pad view to a 64 pad view. And if we get in this mode, select a pad and then select keys mode, now we've got a lot more range that we can play this in melodically. You know what I mean? Okay. Let's go back to a 16 pad view for now. And we've got a little bit of a pattern started. Cool. What I want to do is I'd like to, let's see. We're going to go ahead and do a little bit of audio editing on these hi-hats and go ahead and turn the high-pass filter on each of these sounds so that we're removing any possible like super low frequencies that might be hiding out in these hi-hat sounds that just, don't need to be there. I think also maybe pick that one as like our main hat because it's nice and kind of gentle. We're going to change this from trigger mode for its layer trigger. We're going to change it from a one shot to a hold mode. And what this does is when it's by default, it's puts every sample into one shot mode. And that just means that when I tap the pad, it plays the sample all the way through every single time. We don't really want that with the hi-hat, rather. We want to put it in hold mode, and we want to tame it just a little bit. What the hold mode does is it turns on our amplitude envelope. First thing I want to do is soften the attack on that hat just a tiny little bit. So yeah, we're going to roll that up to like 1 millisecond. I'm going to bring the sustain on that hat actually all the way down so we can tighten it up a little bit as well. I'm going to bring the release down on that also. Make it just bit of a tighter hat in general. Maybe pull the decay back just a tiny bit. Nice. And maybe pull the volume back on that as well. Maybe pan this hat and it's just a touch to the right. Maybe like 5 to the right. Just to get it off of that, dead center. All right, fantastic. Let's go ahead and save at this time. And let's see what that sounds like in the mix. Cool. Let me just get a little pattern going here. Just really basic stuff today. 1, 2, 3, and I'll do that again. 1, da 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 2, da 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 da. Cool. We'll go ahead and save. All right. I think I want to do a little bit of EQing on this hi-hat before we get too much further into it. And what we're going to do is we're going to just select a pad that we want to affect. We're going to put an audio effect on that pad by just clicking audio effects down here in the left. Make sure we save one more time in case anything were to go wrong as we're trying to load an effect. Now, I only want to put this on the hi-hat itself. I don't want to put this effect on the whole bank. And currently, it's set to put the effect on the whole bank. So I'm just going to click on the little tiny pads icon instead of clicking on where it says bank, right? And that's going to actually change it to the pad that I've got selected. So now as I pick a pad, it's, changing what pad is selected over here. And if I tap the hi-hat pad that I want to, put an audio effect on and choose add audio effect, we can choose an audio unit V3 effect. And what I want is just my go-to EQ plugin, which is the FabFilter Pro Q3. And I'm going to just play the groove here. We're going to bring up this plugin. We're going to take a look at this here. This is the frequency that hi-hat is playing, and I really love the FabFilter Pro Q3 plugin. This is actually my go-to EQ on the desktop as well. I have a sort of a Dean's default setting here that allows me to just kind of pull off any of those extra low frequencies. There weren't really any there, but it's not going to harm anything then if I pull that up there. And what I want to do is just kind of tame this hi-hat a little bit and make it a tiny little bit not as harsh. So we're going to go ahead and hold here on the screen, and it's going to, come on, there we go. And it's going to actually like freeze those frequencies so that I can get a better look at those, resonant peaks. Now I've got an Apple Pencil here because doing this with your fingers can get a little bit difficult. But I'm going to just start grabbing these peaks. You can hear that I'm affecting the hi-hat now. If you're on decent speakers or headphones, you can hear how that hi-hat just changed. If you're on your phone, you're probably not going to hear any difference at all in the sound. But that's made that hi-hat quite a bit less harsh sounding. Maybe bring that down just a tiny little bit more as well. Maybe that one, just a tiny little bit. All right. And I think by doing that, it's sounding a lot better. All right. Just check in with the chat real fast and make sure I'm not missing anything important. Sure, we can do that in just a moment. In fact, we'll do that now, Steven. We're going to load a couple of samples onto one pad, you guys, because that's something else that is really awesome about the workflow inside of Beatmaker 3 and that a lot of people don't realize is that we can layer, multiple samples per pad. Let's just do that real fast. I'm going to just start layering some samples onto pad number 16 here, right? So in the main sample folder, let's just grab some stuff we could layer up, right? Here's a 909 snare. We're just going to take that, right? And now, there's a 909 rim. Let's take that and drag it onto that pad as well. Okay, that didn't do it. So what that did was it, replaced the sample for the other one. So again, now it's the 909 snare, but now it's the 909 rim, right? And we want to get both of these onto the same pad. All we need to do is down here at the bottom where it says load method. If we click it, it goes from replace samples, it changes to add to a new layer. And if we click it again, it changes to add to existing layer. And so, or it goes back to replace samples. So it's either replace samples, add to new layer, or add to existing layer. And what we want to do is we want to click it just that one time and select add to new layer. So currently it has the rim. Now we can grab the snare and we can drag that onto it as well. And now we're getting both samples to play back. But here's the thing. If we go to the sampling tab on these and we want to actually affect these sounds individually, we can do that. All we need to do is instead of having it be selected on channel, we just have it be selected on samples. And now we can see that on layer 1, we've got, this rim. And then on layer 2, we've got the snare. Now, check this out, you guys. If I highlight the sample itself, let's say I pan this or something like really extreme, like, I don't know, 100% to the left, right? And now I click the next sample, the panning is back to normal. And what that means is that each layer of these samples that we bring in, this sampling window is individual to that sample. So I could then, if I wanted to, pan this sample, say 100% to the right. And now what I've got is I've got the snare coming out of one side and the rim coming out of the other side. You know what I mean? So we can, I just wanted to show you that we can affect the samples on the individual layers differently. So we can tune them differently, and they each have their own, filter and their own ADSR envelope and their own volume settings. So you can drag the samples onto a new layer and then go into the sample window here and then adjust those samples individually as needed so you can get the perfect sound that's all layered up on one pad, Let's say we don't want to keep that, right? Because we're not using that in today's session. All we need to do is go to any menu where you're going to load samples again. And then we're just going to click clear pad. And there, that's gone now. All right. I hope that answered your question, Stephen. All right. Yes, exactly what Samuel said in the chat, guys. Each layer has independent settings, so if you were to load the samples all onto one layer, then they will all share those same settings. Let's see here. What have we got so far? Cool. We're going to start with getting into some macros here in just a moment. Let's see if we can. Yeah, clear pad didn't clear the name, but it just takes a moment. It's gone now. Like their refresh is a little slow, I think. Let's put this snare in, shall we? Oh, cool. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and. Now, okay, actually, let me explain what I just did there. So here's, we're in our pad view. And what I want to do is I've, programmed in a little snare part. And I put at the end of the pattern a little sort of like accent snare from snare 2. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring the volume back on snare 2. So it's just a really light accent snare. So we need to go into the pattern mode and see our actual, MIDI notes to do that. So if I, see if we're in song mode here by going to the third tab down, and this is the pattern that I want to affect, pattern 1. If I just double click that, it brings us into the pattern view where I can see these actual notes here. Now it puts the sample names over here on the left hand side, typos and all. And we can see that this is the snare here, the accent snare that I want to but bring the volume down on. And all we need to do to make that happen is just like select that, I'll go ahead and pick the selection tool, just kind of tap that. We can go down to where it says pattern MIDI here. And the very first setting is always going to be note velocity. And velocity is just volume. So if I now bring the velocity down on that one note there, it'll be louder or not as loud. Let's go ahead and play the pattern, and I'll bring that down until it sounds all right. Maybe try here for now, quite a bit lower. I think I'm selecting the wrong note. It's actually, let's see, it didn't record my accents there? Wait a minute. Yeah, it's that one. Okay, cool. What I want then is I really want it to be over here, I think. Yeah, cool. So we'll move that accent snare a little bit. And now I can bring the volume down on that. Then we've got it selected. Ooh, that's much better. That's what I'm talking about. Maybe we can put one here, too, maybe. No, let's leave it just subtle. Okay, cool. So to get out of this view, I just hit pattern MIDI again, and then we're sort of back in our main, pattern view. These are just all of the notes. We're working in a one bank workflow today, meaning I easily could have put a bank in, sampled some kick drums into that bank, then added another bank, and put snares on that bank, then added another bank and put hi-hats in that bank, then added another bank and put percussion in that bank, and then added another bank for bass and another bank for melodics and all that kind of stuff. But if we do it that way, it doesn't allow us to do all of the awesome magic macro trickery that we're about to get into. And what I mean by that is macros are a way that we can assign multiple things to happen to one knob. And we can assign this knob to any of the knobs on our MIDI controller so that when the groove is playing that we can turn knobs and we can make neat stuff happen. Okay, that's the basic concept of working with macros. We're going to assign multiple things to happen when we scroll one knob. As well as some other neat features as well, including getting our volumes being able to be set on being able to use, these mixers, these faders rather, sliders, faders, whatever you want to call them, to bring the levels of your sounds in and out. Now, by default, Beatmaker 3 does not allow you to map anything at all to the mixer section. So this is a workaround to getting to use, faders for your levels. And I'm going to show you guys exactly how we do this. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and assign the Novation Launch Control XL and tell Beatmaker 3 which of these knobs we want to be the macros. Beatmaker 3 allows us to assign 16 macros per bank, and we're only working with one bank, so we need to assign 16 knobs, and this is how we do that. We're going to go ahead and from any page inside of Beatmaker 3, if you click the little gear icon up here, you get to the, the settings. And on the first page, you can set, MIDI in and out and all that kind of stuff. And on the second page, we've got our MIDI focus actions. And what this is allowing us to start assigning our MIDI controllers to whatever we want inside of Beatmaker 3. If we've got a controller that has trigger pads on it, for instance, the Launch Control XL at the bottom does have those, and they're already assigned. So let me show you how we would do that. Whoops. Okay, so on the very beginning here, we have trigger pads, and we have, the 16 pads. We can assign those to anything we want. All we do is we just click where it says MIDI binding. And then here it says a pad, so I'm going to click a pad on any controller that I have plugged in, which is right now the Launch Control XL. So if I just click the first pad, it now registers that that pad is going to trigger pad 1. If I select trigger pad 2 and click the next pad over, it now assigns that to that pad. And if I click the third one, and then I click the third pad, and I click the fourth one, and we just go through, and I click each one, and I tell it what I want on my controller to trigger that. Now it's triggering that. And for instance, here we are, triggering pads on Beatmaker 3, right? But I've now assigned my MIDI controller pads to those pads as well. So we could play that stuff right here from the controller. Say if this was a MIDI drum pad, it doesn't matter what the controller is. I really want to get that across. Anything with any knobs or any pads or any sliders or any faders, you can assign to Beatmaker 3 as long as it's a class compliant MIDI interface, MIDI controller. And most of them are, even a lot of the older ones. Let's see here. So we've assigned a couple of these pads. That's not really super relevant today to what we're working on, but we need to know how to do that as well. So now if we scroll down, we get to their macro controls assignments, and there's 16 of those. And we're going to go ahead and take a moment and assign all 16 of these real quick. I'm going to just tap the first one, and it'll just start flashing. And it's just waiting for me to turn any knob on any controller that I have plugged in to Beatmaker 3. I'm going to go ahead and turn knob 1 on my MIDI controller here, and it now knows that knob 1 is set to macro 1. Do the same thing here. I'm going to go through and choose, mat 4. I'll choose a knob. 5, choose a knob. 6, choose a knob. 7, choose a knob. And all I'm doing to make that happen is just, is just moving, the knob once I've touched the screen here. Now, this is the really important part. We're going to map macros 9 through 16, but instead of mapping those to the knobs that are above the faders, we're going to actually use these faders. So I'm going to click macro control number 9, and I'm going to move fader number 1. Now I'm going to choose macro control number 10, and I'm going to move fader number 2. Now I'm going to choose 11 and move 3. You know what I'm saying? So that I'm assigning these macros to these faders. Now we've got these knobs above the fader. So I've got 8 tracks on this controller. I've assigned 1 knob per track, these 8 knobs here, to the first 8 macros. And I've assigned the faders, the sliders, to macros 9 through 16. This is going to allow us to map the volume of our sounds to these faders and use this as we would use any mixer. Okay, let's get into this, you guys. We're going to go ahead and get a close-up view here. Hey, what's happening, Sean? Thanks for tuning in. All right. And what we're going to do is on the very first, okay, actually, let me break this down a little tiny bit. You'll need to have a workflow that you decide on for your controller. It depends on, you know, how many channels you've got or your controller itself, and it depends on your end goal with the music and what you actually want to control. But this is an 8-track controller, and I've sort of developed a workflow that I use with 8-track controllers, and that is I put the kick drum on track 1, I put snares and claps on track 2. I put hi-hats and like ride cymbals and shakers on track 3. I put bass sounds on track 4. That leaves me tracks 5, 6, and 7 to put any combination of melodic sounds on. And it leaves me track 8 to put any combination of effects sounds on. Let's go through that one more time. 1 is kick, 2 is snares and rims and claps, 3 is hats and rides and shakers, 4 is bass, 5, 6, and 7 are melodic sounds, and 8 is for effects. Now that's important to have a workflow, because what we're going to do is we're going to now need to assign the actual sounds to the right faders. And let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, this is our first kick drum, right? And it's the really big, robust kick drum. And in the middle here, we have a knob that says gain. And it's just our volume knob, right? We want to assign this volume knob to the MIDI controller. By double tapping on the knob, a little window pops open, and it will let us choose what we want to do here. We don't want to reset anything. We don't want to set a value on all the layers. We don't want to modulate this, but we do want to assign it to a macro control. So I'm going to click at the bottom where it says macro controls, and now it will allow me to pick whichever macro control I'd like to assign this to. I'd like to assign the volume of the kick drum. Now remember, we talked about the workflow. So I want to assign the volume of the kick drum to fader number 1. And let's go ahead and do that. That's macro number 9. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we assign it, it puts a little number inside of this window here. And it actually, I'm going to put this back to where it was by default, which was -1. Cool. All right, well, -1, 1, that's fine. Now what we need to do is we need to actually tell Beatmaker 3 what it should really do when I move the knob, because currently it's set up, let's see if I go to macros 9 through 16, it's currently set to move this knob the entire range of its movement, all the way down from 0. And then if I push the fader up, we go all the way up on Beatmaker 3 to like plus 12 decibels. Well, that's way too much, right? And what we want to do is we want to have it so that we can bring the volume all the way up or all the way down and never have to worry about the kick drum being too loud, right? We don't need to worry about like setting the level like, oh no, and then I bring it out, and then, oh, I got to bring it to that same weird spot. No. We want to make it so we can just slam these faders up, right? Like bring that kick in, boom, bring a snare in, boom, right? And that's what we're going to do. So if we go and we assign that gain, you know, we've assigned it to macro number 9. Again, macro number 9 is the first fader on the mixer. Now, up here on the second screen, you know, first screen is macros 1 through 8. Second screen over here, macros 9 through 16. And if I click on the dots, it opens up the window to let me have all sorts of control here. And what I want is the minimum state is now going to be when the fader is all the way down at the bottom, and I definitely want that to be 0. But when I max out the fader, I don't want it to be, plus 12 decibels. I just want it to be where it was a moment ago by default, which was negative 1 decibel. Now that I've set that range, I can go ahead and freely move this knob up, and that's the range we're getting. We're getting 0 all the way up to negative 1 decibel. And let me show you, actually, we'll go ahead and do that to the second kick drum first before I show you. We're going to go ahead and tap that second pad. We're going to open up that sampler's window, and we're going to double tap on the gain for that second kick sample. Okay, we're going to go macro controls, and we want to assign that to the same macro that we've assigned the gain of our first kick drum to, macro number 9. Now that's the beauty part. You can assign multiple things to the same macro, so that when we move one slider or when we turn one knob, that more than one things happen. Let's check this out. If we go into macro number 9's settings, now that we've assigned the second sample there, okay, we basically just want to make sure that the settings are pretty much the same as that first sample, where when the knob or slider now is in its minimum state all the way down, the volume on the sound is all the way down. But when I bring the slider or the fader all the way up, this should only go to negative 1 decibels. Now we've got 2 volume knobs that are happening, that are moving, every time I move the fader. So what I can do is if I play the groove, right, that we've got started here, just a little bit of a beat, right? But now if I have the fader down, the kick drum goes away. We've essentially, mapped something to our, controller, as we're using it as a workaround for not being able to map anything to Beatmaker 3's mixer. Okay, now let's quickly do that same thing to the other sounds that are playing, right? If I take this snare samples and I go into the snare samples here, and let's make sure first one, good deal. I'm going to tap the volume on that, and we're going to go macro controls. I'm going to assign that to the next slider over. In fact, that first slider is still just saying gain, and one of the things that we can do is we can make it a little bit easier on ourselves if we actually rename what these macros are doing. So we're going to open that up, and instead of gain, we're now going to click those 3 dots again and give this a rename. This is now our kick drums volume. Okay, good deal. So it says that there, and if we want, we could even, give it a color so that it's like a different color than the other ones. You can really get in here and I'm a little bit colorblind, so I'm not going to probably color each one of these today, but that's just something that you can do as well to help you visually, see the differences. So the kick drums volume is on macro 9 there. We're going to go ahead and tap on this one, and we're going to rename this to snare drums volume. Fantastic. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with the kick drums, so that when I bring the fader all the way up, it doesn't bring the volume of our snare to 12 decibels above 0 rather, but just back where we started with, which was the negative 1 decibel. We're going to do that with our second snare as well. We're going to double click on the volume, or the gain rather. We're going to click macro controls, and we're going to assign that to macro 10, which now that things are labeled, it makes a little more sense. It even says, macro 10, snare drums volume. Well, that's what I'm trying to map this to, so that makes it a little bit more easy when you start labeling things. So now we can get in here and we can do the same thing that, when the slider is all the way down, the volume on that snare sound should be at 0. But when we bring the slider or fader all the way up, that the snare should only come up to negative 1 decibel, which is where it was to start with. This is just arbitrary. This is now and then I'm going to save. This is really important, and that is now, like say if I want to come back and I want to adjust these volumes in the mix, I won't come to the individual pad and then start tweaking the volume here, because that's not where the volume of this sound is assigned. The volumes are now assigned to these macros. So if we want to adjust the volumes, we need to go into the macro and readjust these macro settings. For instance, if I don't want it to be as loud, I'll just bring down the max amount of volume. I hope that makes sense. Let's go ahead and play the groove here. We've got, I think, both snare drums assigned and both kick drums assigned. So now, as you heard, I just dropped out the kick and the snare by pulling down on these faders here, and I can bring those back up at any time. 2, 3, bring them back. Right? All right, let's do the same thing with the hi-hat samples. We're going to go ahead and grab this hi-hat sample here, and we're going to assign that to the third fader over here. So we're going to go back into Beatmaker 3, and on the pad, we're going to, this one is actually its default volume. It's kind of important to note this as you're starting, right? If you have the default volume set to say, you know, a different amount than just the default -1, then you'll need to remember that. And here it's set to -2. So we're going to go ahead and double tap this, select macro controls, and we're going to select the next macro over, which I've assigned to those faders, right? So macro 11. We'll change the name on that one right away so that it makes sense. We're going to, you know, click the 3 dots to open the window, click the other 3 dots to rename, and go in here, and we're going to call this hats volume. Whoops, volume. Cool deal. All right, whoops, and then we crashed Beatmaker 3. This is why I'm a chronic oversaver, because you never know what is going to happen. That doesn't usually happen during my sessions, but you can see if we hadn't been saving, there's a chance we might have lost more than we would want to lose at that time. Let's go ahead and go back to open session, and this is masterclass macros. There it is, cool deal. So we didn't lose any of our sounds, and everything's loaded okay. This is why it's really important to save those samples in the appropriate folder and then redrag them back onto the pads. And this is why it's important to be a chronic oversaver as well, because if anything happens, you don't lose that much. Okay, so I've got both of the mappings on the kick and the snare. Those are still saved because we saved after that. So we really didn't lose much at all. We're going to tap the hi-hat pad there, and we're going to double tap where it says gain, noting that it's set to a -2 decibels. We're going to click macros, and we're going to assign that to macro number 11, the next fader over. Then we're going to go to the macros page so we can actually set that, right? We're going to open up the settings, and then we're going to rename this like we did last time before the crash. We're going to call this hats volume. Okay, cool deal. And we're just going to make it go to when it's in the maximum position, -2. This is why I said it was important to note the volume of the sound before you start mapping it. Okay, -2. And we're going to do that same thing with the other hats as well. We're going to double tap the volume, and we're going to go macro controls and assign that to hats. And then I'm going to pick that open hat, and I'm going to double tap that volume and go macro controls and assign that to hats. Now we'll just need to, you know, here's the hats volume macro, and I just need to adjust those 2 that I just assigned to it. By default, it, you know, remembers that we want it to be set to, you know, 0 when the slider is all the way down, so we'll leave it there. Cool deal. Now I've got all of the sounds mapped to these sliders here, so if I start pressing on these with the sliders down, cool. We don't actually hear the sounds at all, right? And I can bring up our hats, I can bring up our snares, and I can bring up our kicks. I've got full control over those now, bringing them in and out at any time using the volumes. We're going to go ahead and make sure we've saved, and I'm going to take a moment and check in with the chat. It's been a moment here. Never crashes. Yeah, I don't usually have crashes with either. I'm removing, every now and again I get a crash on Beatmaker 3 when I'm like adding a plugin or something. You never know. Yeah, patterning with Beatmaker 3 would be really neat, Lo. I totally agree. I totally agree. Patterning too can rotate the cycle, says Samuel. Probability, pitching of sound, so I'm not sure if it's passable to map. Oh, I see, yeah. Maybe not everything, but definitely the MIDI, right? Okay. All right, so let's see here. What should we do next? Let's go ahead and get some sort of a bass sound maybe sampled in here, shall we? If we go ahead and pick a pad and we go back into the sampling window, we hit record. Since Beatmaker 3 has crashed, we need to reset the recording source. So I'll go ahead and change the camera here, and we're going to go from no input. We'll click that. We're going to select hardware input. And again, I could select either the stereo input or just 1 and 2. That's for like a mono input. I'm doing a mono input today, so we're just going to choose input 1 only. And to hear the sound back that I'm going to play, we'll need to make sure that we have monitor turned on. Okay. Let me grab a sip of coffee and stretch for one moment here. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Okay, let's see if we can't find some sort of a bass sound that we could actually write. If we do that, I kind of would like to get a solid sounding bass though. So how would I do that? If I can just, would I do it like this? Yeah, cool. Tuner. Just kind of checking the pitch on that. Hey, it's a C. We're good to go. We're going to probably just take that then. And, yeah, cool. I just want to get, I don't want to blast you guys out at home, but I definitely want a good level on that. So if I take a look at the screen here, you can see that I would like it to be, you know, a little bit more level than that, but we're going to turn the monitoring off so that I don't just blast this out with a big solid bass wave tone, right? Bring that up just a tiny bit more. Cool. And what let's do is, it's not actually playing, it's just a solid tone. Cool. So we're just going to go ahead and hit record and just record a little bit of that bass tone. It's a C2, so it should be pretty easy to work with. Just going to record a few seconds of that there. All right, and we'll go ahead and stop. And there you can see we've got a nice fat wave of bass here. Cool deal. Then we can start. Oh, I see. Okay. So by default, guys, when we sample a sound, it automatically goes into the one-shot trigger mode, which means that when we trigger the sample, however we trigger the sample, it's going to play it back the entire sample every single time we hit. We trigger it, and we don't want that here. We want to be able to use, the bass as an actual instrument that we can play. So we want to have access to our amplitude envelope. We're going to go ahead and turn it from a one shot to a hold mode down here where it says layer trigger. And now we've got access to our amplitude envelope. What I want to do is I want to go into edit mode. I'm going to click off the macros there, and I want to zoom right in on the beginning of the sound, right in, like right in, way in, right? Cool, even more. And we can see here that we've kind of got a little bit of a screwy start there. What I want to do is I think I'm going to zoom in to take that snap off so I can get it the playhead here to rest wherever I want it to, not where it wants to. I think I'm going to trim right about there. We're going to go trim, and then we're going to zoom in, way in, right? Yeah, that's about what I want. What I want to do now is just grab that end point of the sample and bring it all the way in so that I can do a tiny little bit of a zoom, of a fade rather, on the beginning of this sample. I'm going to get way in here, right? Zoom. We're going to go all the way until the plus button doesn't zoom anymore. And we're going to grab just that time. I mean, this is like literally like about a millisecond of audio at the most, right? We're going to go fade in. We'll do that one more time. Fade in. Maybe one more time. Fade in. Cool. Now we've got like a nice little start off of the zero crossing. And that should probably sound really nice. We're going to go ahead and bring the end point of our bass back out. Just a really, really basic kind of a square wave here. Let's bring this up in volume just the tiniest little bit, shall we? Let's normalize this to like maybe -5. Ooh, that's a lot. Maybe we don't want to do quite that much. Undo and normalize to like maybe -7. Just a little bit more volume. Fantastic. Okay, so here we've got a really nice long bass sample that, like, if I hold it, it'll play, you know, and if I let go, it'll not play. We'll go ahead and save this in the main sample directory. I call this Eurorack bass 1-C, right, because it's a C note. Now we've got that saved into the main sample directory, so we can go ahead and do what we've been doing the whole time, and that's redrag it back onto the pad we want from that directory. So if I open up our browser window here and we scroll through our main, that's a sessions folder. So we're going to go into the little folder icon here, then we scroll down to samples. We get into our main samples folder here, and we can just scroll down until we find that sample. Eurorack bass, a little loud, sorry about that. I'm going to drag that onto the pad there and probably bring it down in volume by default because that's a pretty big, loud bass. Cool. Now that I've redrug it onto the pad, though, it doesn't remember, you know, those settings that I made. So we're going to go ahead and fix that. We're going to go layer trigger one shot to hold mode, and then maybe just bring the release back on this a bit, maybe to like 5 milliseconds. Yeah, so it really is a very tight. All right. Ooh, I'm jealous of those buffalo wings, Russ. That sounds fantastic right about now. All right, let's play the groove, shall we? And see what this bass sounds like. All right. Oh, that was interesting. So I pressed play and nothing happened, right? And for a split second, I thought, oh no, I've done something wrong. I've, you know, messed something up. But I haven't. It's just that the volumes on our sounds are down over here on the mixer. So we'll bring those up. Okay, so like I said in the beginning of the stream today, it's not really so much about the sound design today, and that's one of the reasons why I'm getting some really basic and like pedestrian sounds out of the Eurorack, just really clean and basic sounds, so that we're focusing more on the process and the technique today, as opposed to focusing on like a big serious sound design session. So bear with me, as this groove is going to be probably pretty simplistic, but it's the, you know, the concepts and how we're doing the sampling, and then how we're assigning these things to the macros and the knobs and the sliders that I really want you to, you know, get today. Let's see if we can come up with some sort of a part that we can play here. Turn this bass down even more, I think. Maybe even more, I think. Kind of messing around, see if anything like sort of jumps out at me. If we didn't have a little, you know, MIDI controller over here, we could also play that bass melodically on the pads. We just make sure that the bass is selected and we hit keys. And now we're playing it melodically. Now, say we're not super music theory oriented or something, we can just go to scales mode, and then now we can just pick a scale. I really like to work in F minor pentatonic. It's my favorite scale to work in. Maybe we'll try that scale today. And we can go ahead and set our root note of the pads here down to an F. And whatever your root note is set to, and whatever your scale mode is set to, that's the scale you're in. So if our root here in the bottom left is set to an F, and our scale is set to F minor pentatonic, now we're, you know, playing notes in the key of F minor pentatonic. Let's see what happens here. Put it in a little bit of a bass line, but I'm going to want to make it more than a 2-bar pattern. So let's go ahead and repeat this pattern. And now we've got a 4-bar pattern that I can sort of play over, except that it's not really a 4-bar pattern. It's actually two 2-bar patterns. And what I want it to be is just one 4-bar pattern. There's a couple of ways that we could go about making that happen, but what I think we're going to do is just click the select tool down at the bottom left so that I can select both of those patterns. And now we can click merge and make those into one new pattern. But don't worry, we didn't lose the original 2-bar pattern. If we go into our pattern list here, we can see that pattern 1, 2 bars, is still there. And now we also have a pattern 2, which is 4 bars, that's now there as well. So let's keep this as a 4-bar pattern, shall we? And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, 4 is fine, I think. 1, 2, 3, and... What am I doing wrong here? Maybe I want an 8-bar pattern. Hold on. Boy, it's had an issue with that bass, and what it actually did was it made the... Whoops, it made the pattern a little bit longer as well. Let's go in there. We'll double click there and see what we're actually looking at here. See, it only recorded a couple of those notes where I wanted them. Let's go ahead and undo that, shall we? We'll just grab all these notes here and click delete and try this again. Okay, so it's recording. I'm not really sure why we had the issue when I was on the pads. Let's go back and try again then. Let's try again. 1, 2, 3, and... There we go. Just a really basic, some sort of a bass groove for us today. Bring that back in the mix a little bit, I think. Cool. Can you guys hear that bass sound coming through okay? Just a really basic bass pattern. What let's do now is go ahead and assign the bass to the faders the same way we did with our drum sounds, okay? So if we double click on the volume, noting that our default volume here is at -13, we're going to click macro controls, and we're just going to assign that to the next macro over to the hats, right, which is macro 12. Then we go over to the macros page, and we can give this a name because by default it just says gain, which is what that knob is, gain, you know. So we can click on the 3 dots, we can click on the next 3 dots, and in fact, before we do this, let's just hit that save button, shall we? Save. Cool. So 3 dots, more 3 dots, and then we'll click on the name here, and we're going to call this bass volume. That makes a lot more sense when we're actually looking at it, right? Now remember that I said we need to keep in mind about our default volume, which was -13. So we want it so that when the fader is all the way down, that the volume is all the way down, and when the fader is all the way up, that the volume is at -13. So now, if I press play, we can actually bring all of the volumes down now. You can see that we've got everything assigned to a fader, and that this is how we can get around that way that we can't assign anything to the mixer, is we just don't assign anything to the mixer. We use a one-bank workflow, and we just keep assigning volumes to whatever we want to assign them to, right? Okay. Oh, the default one-shot or hold can be changed in the settings. That is a great point, Samuel. And let's check that out real fast, you guys. If we go into the 3rd page of the settings page, it's called settings and behaviors. And I believe this is where we can set that, right? Yeah, it absolutely is. Here, we can set the pad layer default from hold or one-shot. So if I know in advance, like I'm going to be doing a bunch of melodic stuff that we want to be held down, I could set that and have it record in hold, not record in, but just have it set to that by default. And there's some other really useful settings on this settings and behavior page as well, you guys. Okay, cool deal. I think we can maybe start assigning some macros now to some cool stuff. Okay, let's see here. Let's put some saturation on that bass and see what happens. Change the camera for you guys. Yeah, I like that. So what let's do is one of the things that I like to do is I've assigned, the 8 faders, but each channel has these knobs above it, right? And this is what I assigned macros 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 to. So that we have an assigned macro above every single channel, right? There's a macro available above the kick. There's a macro available above the snares. You see where I'm going with this? And there's definitely a macro available above the bass. So what let's do is let's change the camera. Let's double click on this saturate knob here, right? And let's choose macro controls. And now what I want to do is I've got macro 1 is the knob above the kick. Macro 2 is the knob above the snare. Macro 3 is the knob above the hatch track, and macro 4 is the knob above the bass. So I want to assign this. This is the bass here, and we're assigning saturation amount, and I want to assign that to the knob that's just above the bass here. So if we go over to macros now, and we go to the first page of macros, we'll see that something's been assigned here. It just says amount. We're going to want to give it a name so we know what we're actually dealing with. So we'll do that at this time. This is going to be bass tweaker, because we're going to assign multiple things to happen when we turn the knob. So this is going to tweak our bass sound. We'll just call it bass tweaker. Fantastic. What we want is when this knob is at its minimum position, we don't want any saturation. Maybe we want like just the tiniest little bit, like 3% saturation, right? And then when we turn the knob all the way, have the saturation go up to, I don't know, we'll just pick like 40 for now. And let's see what happens. We'll play the mix. And now, if I scroll that knob, I'm going to show you on the screen actually. If I scroll that knob, I'm moving the saturation amount, it's very subtle, but adding the saturation is adding more harmonic distortion and kind of frequency content to that bass sound. We might put a low pass filter on this bass. Okay, cool. And it might be fun to assign this to the macro as well. Let's go ahead and on the cutoff of our low pass filter, we're going to double click that and we're going to click macro controls. And this is what I really wanted to get across from the beginning, you guys, is how we can label these macros and then we can assign multiple things that happen when we move the same knob. So for instance, we already have a macro assigned to do some stuff when we start tweaking it to do some stuff to our bass, and that's what we're still working on here. So I'm going to assign it to that same knob, right? So if we look at macro 4 here, it says bass tweaker, and if I open that up, we can get to the controls of the cutoff that I just assigned to there. What we want is in its minimum position, when the knob isn't, moved at all, when it's all the way to the left, that the filter is all the way open. So we're getting no filtering on the sound at all. And when I start rolling that filter down, when I start turning the knob rather, we'd like to have some filter happen. We'd like to roll that filter down as well. So now we're adding more saturation and we're low pass filtering at the same time when I move one knob here. And I can show you that by over here on the screen. We can see that we're moving the saturation knob, but we're also moving this filter cutoff knob, and we're starting to filter that sound down. Can you guys see that at home? We're going to do one more assignment here as well before we move on, and that's the resonance. We're going to take note that that's 0.45 at its default setting, and we're going to double click that resonance. We're going to go macro, and we're going to assign the resonance to our bass tweaker as well. Now, if we open up that macro, we can adjust those settings. So remember I said we want to take note, what our minimum position is, what it was by default. It was 0.45. So I'm setting that to 0.45. So when the knob is at all the way down in its 0 position, that we're not affecting the resonance from its default amount. But when we start rolling that knob, we'd like the resonance to move a little bit. And now you'll see that when I start rolling this, you can't see me moving the knob, but I'm moving the knob off the screen. And you can see that 3 knobs inside of Beatmaker 3 are starting to move. And we can see what's happening here as the filter starts to move as well. So I believe, yeah, I have this down a little bit more than I want. I see, it's not. Okay, so no, it's not. We do want it to 0.45. Okay, no worries. And maybe a little bit hotter when I roll the knob down. Yeah, see, okay, but I'm even more hotter. So now when I roll that knob down, do you see how this little peak starts building here and goes higher and higher, and then we actually get kind of like a little peak looking thing? Can you see the difference as I'm rolling the knob here as that peak goes up? That's the resonance that we're assigning so that we get a little bit more squelch and distortion kind of sound in the sound. Let me play the groove and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so now we have, and this is how I adjust the settings as well, is that we play the groove, we turn the knob all the way up, and we make sure that it's, you know, sounding like we want it to sound, that it's doing what we want, and if it's not, we can adjust accordingly. And what I mean by that is I'll play the groove here, and I'd like it to low pass filter a little bit more when I turn the knob all the way up here. So we're going to just make that happen. We're going to go back into the settings, and on the bass tweaker, the cutoff, when the knob is all the way up in its maximum position, I'm going to have it go down quite a bit further. And now what we'll see is when I roll that knob, here's at the top, so the knob's not being moved at all. And when I start rolling it, you can see that filter is really moving down now. And let's hear what that sounds like. So the knob is at its 0 state there. I start rolling the knob. I think we can get away with even more than that. So we're going to bring this open again and bring this cutoff down to maybe like around 500 and make it super, super dramatic. Let's see what that sounds like. Leave the knob all the way up and start that up. We're going to start rolling that knob down. Fantastic. So now we have an interesting range of movement on the sonic qualities of this sound, you know. And how we might use something like this, let me go ahead and save at this time, is we might do a couple of things at the same time. We might sort of like scroll this knob down for the bass and low pass filter it. Then we might use the mixer to say drop that kick out for a second as a turnaround. Then roll that bass back up and drop the kick back in. What are you talking about, Dean? Let me show you. So our groove is playing, right? 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3. We got 5, 2, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4. Rolling down the bass and drop the kick. Let's bring it back. Do that again without talking. We got 5, 2, 3, 4. So do you hear how we can use these macros and faders now to start kind of, you know, working with the groove in real time? You can bring out the bass if we want, you know. Bring out those hats at any time. You can bring out the hats and the kick. Filter down that bass. So we can just start bringing things in and out this way. Okay, cool deal. Let's go ahead and save. Now, at the beginning of the session, we sampled kind of a melodic pluck. And if we go into this page here, we can decide the polyphony of that pluck, which means how many notes it will play before sort of cutting itself off. By default, the polyphony is set to like 1, meaning everything is just mono, meaning anytime I hit a note and play another note, it's going to, you know, pretty much by default stop that note from ringing out as it plays the next note. Okay, but that's what polyphony means, and we can make it so that doesn't happen. So for instance, you know, as it is now, if I try to hold a chord, which is like 3 notes on that sound, it won't let me, right? Because it's set to polyphony 1, and a chord is 3 notes, and it won't play 3 if the polyphony is set to 1. So if you want this sound to, you know, be playable with like a pad or chords or whatnot, we need to give it at least as many voices as notes are in your chord. So if I want to play a 3-note chord, I need at least 3 voices down here to do that. I find that a good kind of place is usually about 8 voices. And now what happens is that the notes will play over each other, you know. Set to layer 1 shot, so every time I trigger a note, it's going to play the full length of this note. Let's go ahead and save at this time. And what we might do is go ahead and put some reverb and delay in the mix at this time as well. I'm going to try to do this pretty quickly. I've gone through this procedure quite a few times on the channel, so that you guys will probably be familiar with this already. We're going to go ahead and just select Audio Effects Send 1, and we're going to go ahead and put my EQ on there that cuts the low frequencies off beneath 600, so that there's no possibility that we're going to get any low frequencies coming through our reverb send or our delay send. Now, let's go ahead and put some reverb on send 1, and let's save actually before we do that, and use an audio effect v3. Let's just scroll down. How about we choose this? What did I choose? MIDI? No. Let's just choose black hole. Cool. Maybe go into that plugin and choose factory presets, and maybe just choose like black hole to start us off with or something. Bring the mix on the reverb all the way up because it's a send and not an insert effect. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining that, but let's see what we got here. Cool. Now we've got some reverb. We can assign anything in the mix to that reverb. You guys know I love like big, huge reverbs, so it's not super difficult to just kind of pick the black hole and go with it there. Let's go ahead and save, and then let's put a delay on effects send number 2, shall we? Let's choose Dub Station 2. That's a cool delay, right on. And this is from Audio Damage, and I believe I might even have some presets ready to go in here. Dean's Get Down 1. Cool, let's try that one. Close. Cool. And let's make that more wet because it's a send and not an insert. Cool, and let's try that. Turn this up on the send. Fantastic. And let's go ahead and go in here and turn this from a 1 shot to a hold so that we have control over the envelope of this sound. We can make it tighter if we wanted to by like bringing down this the sustain. In fact, yeah, let's do that. Make it a little tighter. Maybe put a high-pass filter on this as well, super gently, to get rid of any frequencies that might be hanging out that we can't hear, like beneath about 200-ish. Let's see what we can do here. Why am I getting all that extra reverb in the mix? Because that's weird. Let's see what I did wrong. Oh, I see what I did wrong here. I put the reverb and delay on the entire bank. And what I want to do is just highlight the pad up here that says bank 1 and double tap on that. And that, what it does is gives me access to each pad that's in our bank now individually to send these different effects to. So if I want to affect the pluck here only, I can just now do that and put the reverb and the delay just on that pluck sound. Cool. Okay, I think what we'll do is let's go ahead and maybe make this an 8-bar loop for me to play some sort of a lead part over. And what we're going to do is, let's see, go to pattern 2 and make this 8 bars, okay? Then we're going to drag it out on the timeline to be 8 bars, and we're going to drag our loop brace out to 8 bars. I'm going to double tap that. I'm going a little quickly here, and we're going to highlight all of those notes there and just click duplicate. Looks like it lined them up okay. Let's double check that. Back to song mode for us there. There we go. Cool. So now we've got an 8-bar loop. Hey, what's happening, Alpo? Thanks for tuning in. So now we've got sort of an 8-bar loop that I can mess around over. What we want to do is just sort of highlight the track that I want to play. Bring the volume down on that by default a little bit so it's not quite so loud. Cool. I hit record mode and just see if I can't maybe get lucky and play something in. Who knows? Let's try. Here we go. Cool. Again, like I, said in the beginning, it's not necessarily today about creating the most amazing sounding groove. It's just about these techniques that I'm trying to show you. So we're actually working with some more basic sounds today than I might normally work with. Let's go ahead and tame a little bit of the reverb and delay on that lead sound so it's not quite so robust, shall we? And let's also go ahead and put some more, let's make the attack on this sound softer. Since our kick drum is so, really hard and punchy, this sound has a really sharp attack right now, and it's kind of conflicting with the transient of the kick drum. So if we just bring that attack up by about a millisecond, that should probably soften it enough. Let's try a little more. Maybe about 4 milliseconds. Bring the volume up half a decibel. Can you guys hear that okay? Is it getting too loud? Is anything distorted? Well, it's not really about the grooves today, Andre. That's kind of what I'm explaining. Today is a masterclass about sampling and about assigning things to macros. So we're not specifically really worried about the sounds themselves, and we're not really worried about the pattern itself. What I want to get across is how you can assign these different sounds once we've recorded them in to your controllers, and then start being able to use your controllers in ways that you might not have thought of with Beatmaker 3. This is a one-bank workflow today, and if you're just tuning in, we've assigned the drum sounds and the bass sounds to this mixer here, and if I play the groove, I can actually pull those sounds down in real time. Bring the bass in, We've assigned another macro here so where I can roll the cutoff on that bass. 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3. Bring the drums back. So in keeping with this formula, we're going to go ahead and assign the volume of that new sound to the next fader over so that we have the control over the volume of that sound as well. I'm going to go ahead and just double click on the gain of that, keeping note here that the default right now is set to negative 1.7. We're going to double click on that. We're going to click macros, and over here we've got our kick drum volume, snare drum volume, hats volume, and bass volume. I want that on the next one over, so macro 13. Now we go to the macros page. We go to the second tab to get to the second half of the macros, 9 through 16. And here we have one that just says gain. It's a macro 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 here. We're going to open this up and click the next set of dots so that we can give that a name that makes a little bit more sense. This is going to be our pluck volume. Fantastic. And we want when this fader is at its default state, when it's minimum value, so that's like all the way down, you know, we want the volume on that sound to be all the way down. And then we want when it's in its maximum position, I believe I said it was like negative 1.5 or something. We might need to figure that out. 1.5. Cool. And now when the fader is all the way up, the volume will go to negative 1.5. And so let's see. Here I am moving that slider, and we can see that we're moving the macro, which is moving that volume knob. Okay. So let's play the groove and turn the fader up. Okay. So we've now got all of the volumes assigned to faders. So in real time, you know, this is the thing that everybody's been wanting to do in Beatmaker 3 for the last 3 years, right? You assign things to the mixer, and this is how you do it. You use a one-bank workflow, and you assign the volumes of the sounds, you know, to macros 9 through 16. That way you've still got access to mapping stuff through 1 through 8. I really like being able to use the Launch Control XL because we've got, you know, 8 faders and also 8 knobs. So I like to typically assign something to each knob above each sound as well. So we can, you know, not only just work with the volumes, but also do other neat stuff. And let's see if we can't do that, right? So we've got our kick drum on channel 1, and there's a knob above that. Macro 1 is still available. Let's go ahead and make something happen when we move that knob, right? We've got 2 kick drums, so we're going to need to do this on both of these kick drums. Hey, thanks for tuning in, Matt. And what we're going to do is let's go ahead and assign like a high pass filter to this so that we have 2 options of like bringing the kick drum out of our groove here. We can either bring it down in volume by pulling the fader down, or maybe we could high pass filter it a bit so that it just kind of removes some lows but doesn't take it out of the mix completely. Let's assign a high pass filter down here at the bottom. Bring that resonance maybe down to about 40. And then by default, let's have this be all the way to the left. So no high pass filtering at all, right? And if I play the sound and we turn the high pass up, do you hear what that, you know, we're taking out all those lows. Okay, so we're going to assign this to the knob above the fader that we've assigned the volume of the kick drum to, right? We're going to double click on that. We're going to go macro controls, and here we can see what we've assigned already. We just want to assign it to macro 1. Now we're going to go to macro 1, and currently it just says cutoff. What we want to do, actually that's not quite right. We want, what did I Right, I'm sorry, it is right. What we want to do is we want to go over here and relabel this to kick high pass because we're going to assign this to high pass filter the kick. So we want when the knob is at its default position that there to be no high pass filtering going on at all. So it's at the minimum position when it's in the minimum position. Fantastic. But when we roll the knob up, we don't need it to go all the way to 20,000 hertz and get rid of every single element of the kick. We just want to shave off those bottom few frequencies a little bit. I'm going to choose maybe like 226 hertz and we'll see what that does. Okay, I'd like it to be a little more than that, so we're going to maybe make this 300-ish. So we'll go 301. Cool. Now we just need to do that same thing to our other kick drum sample because we have 2 different kick drums here. So we're going to grab that second kick drum, open up, actually, yeah, and then we're going to assign a high pass filter to it first, bring the resonance down to about 40. Awesome. And then double click on the cutoff and assign that to the macros. We're going to assign that to the exact same macro, kick high pass, okay? And then we can see here we're affecting kick high pass. And we open that up. And we just need those settings to be the same. So when we scroll the knob up, that both samples change the same amount. So we're going to put this one to 301 as well. Right around the same, it'll be fine. 303, that's fine. And now, when I play the groove and I roll this now, okay, so I can take out the kick entirely by pulling the fader down, right? Or I can just high pass it. Do you hear how it's kind of still in there now, but we've removed some of the low frequency content, but it's not actually gone from the mix like it is if we, you know, pull the volume down. So now we've given ourselves a couple of different ways to interact with that same sound. Cool. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and make sure we're saving. Definitely, I want to really encourage you all to be chronic oversavers. You saw that we had one crash today. We didn't actually really lose anything in that crash because I'm always hitting that save button. Let's go ahead and do something neat to the pluck, shall we? Let's and this is a technique that I'm really excited to share with you guys. What I want to do is I want to like put some sort of a wobble effect on the pluck sound, and I want to make it so that that effect can be brought in and out using a macro. So this is a little bit deeper than some of the other techniques. So follow me on this one, you guys. What we're going to do is we're going to assign an LFO to wobble the tuning of this sound ever so gently. And how we're going to do that is I think we'll try fine tune first. We're going to double click on the knob for fine tuning. And instead of assigning this to a macro like we've been doing, we want to put some modulation on this fine tuning. I want to modulate this back and forth and make it wobble a little bit using an LFO. So we're going to go modulate, and we're going to choose an LFO. We're getting a little bit into sound design here, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to choose really simple sounds to sample in today, so that we're starting with really, really basic stuff. We're going to choose a new LFO. And now we're going to actually switch over to a different page in the sampler menu, which is the Modulations tab. And here we can see that there's an LFO that's been added. What I'm going to do is just play that sound. Cool deal. And we can see on the screen really gently here that we're starting to affect the sound with an LFO. What I'm going to do is select that LFO, and now we can adjust some of these settings here. We're going to go ahead and sync this, I think, to a pretty fast, like maybe 1/16th, and maybe, yeah, okay. I'm going to give it 100% of the modulation there. And do you guys see how it starts to get a little wonk? Can you hear the difference there? And I'll take it, rather, I think I can just unactivate it. Well, I can just take it. Oh, there it is, active, Okay, so here we have a really clean. Okay, and if I turn this on now, you see how we're getting a little wonky there, right? Fantastic. Here's how we're going to make this sound cool. You see at the bottom right here, there's an amount section, okay? And what this is the same thing as basically turning it on and off. If I roll the amount down, we're not getting any of that effect at all. And as I start turning that amount up, you know, we add more and more of that sort of pitch wobble. What we're going to do is we're going to double click on the amount knob here, and we're going to assign that knob to a macro. And we're going to assign it to the macro that's above the track for this sound, which is track number 5. So we're going to go to macro controls, and we'll see that our first macro, number 5, which is our top row of knobs, is still empty. So I'm going to assign that to that macro. Now over here by default, it's assigned, and it's just labeling that as amount, which is a little bit confusing. So we're going to go ahead and give this a different name. We're going to call this pluck pitch wobble. And this is the amount of pitch wobble that we are sending to the pluck sound now. So you can see that it's all the way up, but if I take the knob and I roll the knob down, there's no pitch wobble at all. And if I play our groove, now I can adjust how much of that wobble we want in that pluck sound by just rolling the knob. It's very subtle, but now that I've got it all the way up to the top, we're wobbling the fine tune on that sound a bit. And it's very subtle, and you can have a little or a lot or none. We're going to have just a little. Now don't forget, we can pull these down at any time. And we're already sort of arranging a groove, even though we just have an 8-bar loop, really. kicks are really loud today. I'm digging that kick we got out of the Eurorack. That is a fat kick drum. All right. Okay, I'm going to see if there's any questions in the chat, and if you guys have any save. If you guys have any questions, now would be a wonderful time to ask those. Looks like we've been streaming for about 2 hours. Yeah, color coordinating the banks is really a fun one for sure. Absolutely. In fact, I did take the time. I think it might be in here. Let me get off of these macros rather and get back to the default setting. Cool. And then I believe if I highlight a pad and then down here, whoops, I'm in the wrong camera. Down here in the screen, if we choose these little 3 dots over here by where the pad is at, we can go to color. And one of the neat things in one of their recent updates is they've actually put these palettes together now. If you haven't explored these, you can go in and set the color scheme in these palettes to be whatever you want, and then sort of, you know, refer back to it as needed. And I have one that I just made into kind of a gradient. And what we could do is we could really fast just recolor these pads to sort of match that gradient by selecting each pad and then tapping the next, you know, color. And this is, you know, if you take the time to set this up, you can have some pretty cool stuff here. You can just have complementary colors, or I thought it might be fun to try to do this little gradient. And that's kind of a little bit more fun, you know, than just the default colors. And something also is that the color of the pad is also the color of the text inside your bank. So it's like if you have different colors, like maybe if your, you know, basses are all red and your drums are all blue or something, that color coding can kind of make a difference as well. Hey, what's happening, Norbert? Thanks for tuning in. All right, so let's see here. I had a list here. I want to make sure that I'm not missing any really important notes that I want to share with you guys. I think another option that we can do today might be a really cool one. I like to sometimes assign the pitch of a sound to a macro as well. And I think that might be a good option here. Cool. What we're going to do is open up that pluck again, and what I did was I assigned some wobbling on that to the LFO, right? And then we assigned that to a knob, so we can decide how much little tiny pitch wobble we'd like to have. But let's make it so when we roll the knob that this sound changes an octave. How about that? Let's take the main tuning, and we're going to double click that, right? And we're going to go macro controls. And this is something that we're affecting on that pluck sound, right? So we want it to be assigned to the same macro we've already assigned to the pluck, which is macro 5, which I've labeled pluck pitch wobble. And so now we've assigned the the coarse tuning rather of this sound to that same macro. And here's what we're going to do here. We're going to take that tuning and we're going to make it when the knob is at its default state, that there should be no, you know, tweaking or tuning of the pitch at all. But when we do roll that knob, let's have this sound go down 1 octave so that when we roll the knob all the way to the maximum, it's going to be 1 octave lower. That may or may not sound cool. Let's find out. So here's our, whoops, there we go. So I've got the knob in its default 0 position state now. I'm going to bring these drums back so that we can hear this a little better. Now I'm going to roll it down. Doesn't sound that cool. Let's try the opposite. Let's try if we take it up an octave instead. So at its minimum state, how about instead of negative 12 semitones, that it is plus 12 semitones? One of the things about when you do this with the pitch as well is sometimes it's not super awesome to go slow when you're rolling it because you are changing the pitch, and that can kind of sound wonky. So sometimes when I assign the pitch like an octave to a macro like this, I might try to turn that macro pretty quickly. The automation itself, I don't believe you can constrain to any type of scale, Sean, but I'm not exactly sure I understand the question because the knobs, here aren't assignable to any type of scale. The only scales that we have are just melodic scales. And the amount that the knobs move is what we set up inside of these windows here. So it doesn't stick to a scale, but we can set, you know, where the knob is in its default state and where it is at its maximum state. So we know how much of a range we're getting when we turn the knobs per se. To link MIDI numbers channels. I don't, but I do know that we can. I do know of a way that might actually get you where you want to go, though, and that is, let's see here. If we go, take the macros off, right, and we go, yeah, back to our channels page, right? Let's say we want more than one sound to trigger every time I hit this pad here, which is our pluck, right? We can turn the link group on, and let's say we put, you know, like link group 1 on there, and arbitrarily, maybe we had other melodics that we would also want to trigger, but let's just pick a random pad for now. We'll pick like, excuse me, those volumes are down. Cool, we'll pick this snare, right? And we'll put that in link group number 1. And now when I hit this pad, it triggers both, you know, samples. So if you want to trigger more than one pad with one MIDI number, just use that link feature and have the MIDI number of the pad you want to trigger, you know, be, say, pad 1 or whatever, and then you can just link any of the other pads to that using the link group number here at the bottom. Okay. I hope that helped at all as a workaround for that. Okay, so let's see what this sounds like when we change the pitch up 1 octave on that pluck sound with the macro. So the macro's at its all the way down position. I'm going to roll it up slow so we can hear the pitch changing. Hear that pitch change and get out of whack there. But now when I roll it all the way to the top, it's a full, you know, it's a full-on octave louder. I mean, not louder, but higher in pitch. But it also sounds kind of a little bit weird and off, maybe. And that's because we assigned that pitch wobble to it when it goes all the way up. How we can fix that is maybe just tame that pitch wobble a little bit, right? So that it's not at 100% when that goes all the way up, but maybe more like 50%. And now what we're doing when we roll that knob is we're doing two things. We're adding a little bit of pitch wobble, but we're actually also raising the pitch of the sound by 1 octave. Let's try that again and play the groove. And I'm going to scroll the knob faster this time so we don't hear the transition. So that's a pretty neat thing. Now we can, let's change the pitch. Roll the bass down. Do you guys hear how we're starting to actually jam with this groove now? It's just an 8-bar loop, you know, but we're actually doing some jamming. And again, we can bring all of our volumes down and we can literally do the arrangement of this groove right here from the pad. Well, if you're going to assign the MIDI from other apps, though, then it really depends on that app specifically. I don't know of any apps, like I don't think patterning will let you put two MIDI numbers on the same note per se. I don't think there's not any apps that I know of that will allow you to put two MIDI numbers on the same note. The only way I'd know for you to be able to trigger two things with the same would be to do it inside of Beatmaker 3 like I just showed. With the linking of the pad so that you can get more than one sound to trigger. But I don't think like you'll be able to tell patterning like this note is a a C4 but also a C5. Like I don't think that's a thing. I'm sorry. Okay. So what we did today, guys, is we sampled these raw sounds, really basic sounds out of the Eurorack, quick sampling, and then we, created a really basic pattern with these sounds, and then we started really getting into the macros and assigning some of the volumes of these sounds to the faders on my mixer so that I can get around the limitation of not being able to assign things in Beatmaker 3's mixer, rather, to a MIDI controller, but using this one bank workflow, your macros will always be available. If you have more than one bank in the mix, that's what happens is that if you have another bank selected, all of the macros that we just assigned on bank 1 will not be active because we're now on bank 2. And they will only be active when we, literally change back over to bank 1. And that's why I don't use a multiple bank workflow in Beatmaker 3 because I want to be able to, assign whatever I want to controllers and have no matter what's happening in the Beatmaker 3 session to have these knobs always ready to go and always available, to do what I programmed them to do. Okay, unless anyone has any specific questions, I think we got all of the details across today about the recording, about the sampling, and about assigning things to the macros, and how we can really just keep assigning different things to the macros as well. One of the other things that I like to do is to assign effects tweaks to macros. So like for instance, if we wanted to, maybe put some delay on our snare drum, we might highlight that pad and then go to the effects section of just that pad. We might select the pad itself only, so we're not affecting the whole bank, but just the pad. And I might just put the built-in delay on this, right? And turn the dry wet mix all the way down. But then we might double click that dry wet mix and assign this to a macro. So what we could do is I'm putting this on the snare sound, and the snare sound is our second track here, macro 10 there. So I'm going to assign this to macro 2, which makes what I'm assigning here be on the knob that's on the top of the snare drum track, right? And now if we just go to the macros, we'll see that macro 2 says wet mix, and if I rename this here, I can call this snare delay. And whoops, maybe it helps if I spelled it correctly. Snare delay, okay. And what we can do with this is the same thing we've been doing with everything else. We just decide how much we want to happen when we actually move the knob. So let's start out at say 0 and maybe bring this up to like, I don't know, 65%. Let me just double check on that actual effect. Audio effect. Snare. Let's bring the high pass up a tiny bit on that. Bring some other sounds down so we can just hear that snare. And now when I roll the knob above the snare, we're now adding that delay onto the snare. So we can adjust, maybe make it, maybe some 8th note dotted. Cool, kind of put a different delay on each side, so it's a little bit of a stereo delay. That's cool. And so now if we bring up all the sounds in the mix again and play the groove, right? We can roll that delay up on the snare. So bring out the kick. Get that delay on the snare, right? Kind of taking a break. Maybe messing with the pitch on that lead, right? Maybe filtering the bass down. And bringing the kick back. Here we go. So that's just it. We can keep assigning the different things to the same knobs as much as we want. We can get in here and literally we could assign like pitch or saturation to the knobs. And I really like that trick of, setting up an LFO to work, but then taking the amount of that LFO and assigning that to a knob so that you're now able to bring in and out modulation in real time as well. Yeah, I really appreciate that, Lo. Thank you very much. Hey, thanks, Ed. All right. Ooh, your own metal drum kit. All right. Nice work, Ed. That's what I'm talking about. Getting it done. Cool deal. Okay, so unless there are any other questions, special stuff like creating a down filter for use in the video. Yeah, I love being able to do that kind of stuff. I love having anything that allows me to really like stick to that grid. When I'm focusing on a whole bunch of stuff in front of me, it's really common that I might sort of like lose my timing position. So to have something that I can just wait for to come back in, and then suddenly I'm hearing it and just can start my counting again and be right back on the grid. I absolutely love being able to do that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, guys, I think we're going to call it for today. I really appreciate everyone tuning in. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing next week. I've got the studio pretty crammed. I'm actually setting up for a live set. Not setting up for a live set, but I'm actually working on the process of creating a live set for another online music festival. It's going to be like a 5-day online music festival. This is Clown Fest 5. I've got like a 20-minute set, and that'll be on Friday, April 2nd is my slot. That festival starts on April 1st. So I've kind of like got the back corner all sort of situated with like stuff that I'm working on there, and the front's a little crammed as well, but hopefully that's going to be fun, and I've been really putting in the hours on putting that together. So I'll be live streaming that to the channel on Friday, April 2nd, somewhere in the afternoon. Or whatnot. But we'll definitely be back next Sunday with some sort of a live stream. I don't know if we're going to do Beatmaker 3 again, or just, something else in general, maybe Digitact or something, maybe more Eurorack. Yeah, cool. I'm going to give you guys just a second to say goodbye to each other in the chat. Thanks, Samuel. All right. Thanks, Lo. Not the best groove in the world today, but just trying to get the point across, how to get those samples in, how to get those, the editing on those samples, how to resave those samples and reload them so that they will always load in your sessions, and then how to assign things creatively to your MIDI controllers. Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Lo. Right on. All right. Fantastic. I really appreciate everyone watching, and until next time, thanks for watching. All right.